A teacher notices a black boy acting weird in class, then he draws a picture that changes everything. The first thing Ms. Sarah Carter noticed wasn't the torn backpack or the same faded blue hoodie Malik had worn for 3 days straight. It was his eyes. Where once they had sparkled with curiosity during her morning math lessons, now they seemed to stare through the whiteboard, distant and hollow. The transformation had been gradual, like watching a bright flame slowly dim until only embers remained. "Malik, can you solve number 7 for us?" Ms. Carter asked, her voice gentle but expectant. The 10-year-old boy blinked slowly, as if emerging from a deep sleep. His dark hands fumbled with a pencil that looked ready to snap in half, much like everything else he owned. The backpack slumped beside his desk had a tear running down its side, held together with what appeared to be duct tape that had lost most of its stick. I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. Can you repeat the question?" 3 months ago, Malik Williams had been one of her most engaged students. His hand shot up for every question, his homework was always complete, and his smile could light up the entire classroom. He had that rare combination of natural intelligence and genuine enthusiasm that made teaching feel less like work and more like watching a garden bloom. But something had changed. Ms. Carter had been teaching 5th grade at Roosevelt Elementary for 8 years. She'd seen enough struggling children to recognize the signs, though each case carved a new worry line into her heart. The overcrowded classroom of 28 students meant individual attention was a luxury she couldn't always afford, but Malik's transformation demanded her focus. "The question was about fractions, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." As she moved on to another student, Ms. Carter caught Malik's head drooping forward. By 10:30 a.m., his eyelids were fighting a losing battle against exhaustion. This had become his pattern, alert for the first hour, then fading like a battery running out of power. During lunch, while other children rushed to the cafeteria with excitement, Malik lingered. He would pack his things with deliberate slowness, as if dreading what came next. When he finally made it to lunch, Ms. Carter noticed he never bought anything from the hot lunch line. Instead, he would sit quietly at the end of the table, sometimes with a small bag of crackers, sometimes with nothing at all. But what puzzled her most was what happened to the leftover snacks. Every Friday, Ms. Carter brought a small basket of granola bars and fruit for students who might need an afternoon boost. By the end of most weeks, a few items remained. She'd started noticing that these leftovers would mysteriously disappear, usually when Malik was the last student in the classroom. At first, she'd assumed other students were taking them on their way out. But last Tuesday, she'd watched from the corner of her eye as Malik carefully slipped 2 granola bars into his torn backpack, glancing around nervously to make sure no one was watching. Ms. Carter's heart had clenched. She'd pretended not to notice. The following Monday brought a new concern. During their morning routine, a sudden clap of thunder from an unexpected storm had sent most students into excited chatter about the dramatic weather. But Malik had visibly flinched, his shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow. His hands had trembled as he gripped his desk, and it took several minutes for his breathing to return to normal. "Are you okay, Malik?" she'd asked quietly, crouching beside his desk. "Yes, ma'am. Just don't like loud noises." The way he said it, with a careful control that seemed too mature for his 10 years, made her stomach twist. That afternoon, as students packed up for dismissal, Ms. Carter observed the usual chaos of children preparing to reunite with parents, siblings, or babysitters. Some students practically bounced with excitement to share their day's adventures. Others moved with the resigned familiarity of routine. Malik packed differently. Each movement seemed calculated, as if he was preparing for something far more significant than just going home. He would check his backpack multiple times, ensuring the torn zipper was pulled as far as it would go. He'd look around the classroom one final time, his gaze lingering on the warm, bright posters and the reading corner with its comfortable bean bags. Most telling of all was what happened at pickup time. Roosevelt Elementary had a well-organized dismissal system. Parents and guardians formed neat lines by grade level, and teachers would call out names as familiar faces appeared. Bus riders had their own designated area, and walkers were released in groups based on their neighborhoods. Malik was always in the walker group, but Ms. Carter had never seen anyone come for him. While other children ran excitedly toward waiting adults, Malik would simply leave. He'd walk slowly toward the main exit, often glancing back at the school building as if memorizing it. On this particular Wednesday, Ms. Carter's concern reached a tipping point. She'd spent her lunch break in the main office, casually reviewing Malik's enrollment file. What she found made her more worried, not less. The emergency contact information listed only a grandmother, Evelyn Williams, with an address on Maple Street, one of the older, more established neighborhoods in their district. The phone number, when she discreetly tested it the day before, had been disconnected. There were no other emergency contacts. No parents listed as guardians. No updated information since the beginning of the school year. As she watched Malik disappear through the front doors that Wednesday afternoon, Ms. Carter made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She was going to start paying much closer attention to Malik Williams. That evening, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about the quiet boy with the hollow eyes and the torn backpack. She thought about his careful hoarding of snacks, his extreme exhaustion, his fear of sudden noises, and his solitary departures from school. In her 8 years of teaching, she'd learned to trust her instincts about children in trouble. Something was very wrong in Malik's world, and every fiber of her being as both an educator and a human being was telling her that time might be running out to help him. She had no idea that tomorrow's art assignment would provide the key to unlocking a secret that would test every assumption she'd made about the quiet boy in the torn hoodie. Ms. Carter went to bed that night with Malik's distant eyes haunting her dreams, unaware that in a condemned building across town, a 10-year-old boy was sitting guard while his 6-year-old sister slept, counting the granola bars in his backpack and praying they would last until Friday. Thursday morning brought a revelation that would haunt Ms. Carter for weeks to come. She had arrived early, as was her habit, to prepare for the day's lessons. The hallways of Roosevelt Elementary were still quiet, filled only with the gentle hum of heating vents and the distant sound of custodial staff finishing their morning rounds. As she unlocked her classroom door, she was startled to find a small figure huddled in the hallway beside her room. Malik sat with his back against the wall, his torn backpack clutched tightly against his chest like a shield. His eyes were wide open, but he looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "Malik? Honey, what are you doing here so early? School doesn't start for another 45 minutes. He scrambled to his feet, nearly dropping his backpack in the process. I couldn't sleep. I thought maybe I could do some reading before class starts." Ms. Carter's heart squeezed. In all her years of teaching, she'd never had a student arrive this early voluntarily. "Of course, sweetheart. Come on in." As she flicked on the classroom lights, she noticed Malik's visible relief at being in the warm, safe space. He immediately gravitated toward the reading corner, but instead of picking up a book, he simply sat and stared out the window, his body finally relaxing for the first time since she'd found him. "Malik, have you eaten breakfast?" His pause was telling. "I'm not really hungry in the mornings." Ms. Carter kept a small stash of breakfast bars in her desk for situations exactly like this. She quietly placed one on the table beside him, along with a juice box. "Well, it's here if you change your mind." Within minutes, both items had disappeared. As the day progressed, Ms. Carter continued to document Malik's unusual behaviors. During their science lesson about weather patterns, the simple act of her closing a window had made him jump violently. When she'd accidentally dropped a stack of books during reading time, Malik had instinctively raised his arms as if to protect himself. But it was during afternoon free time that she witnessed something that made her blood run cold. Jessica, one of the more boisterous students, had been playfully chasing another classmate when she accidentally bumped into Malik's desk. It was harmless contact, the kind of innocent collision that happened dozens of times each day in any elementary classroom. Malik's reaction was anything but normal. He recoiled as if he'd been struck, his chair scraping backwards so violently it toppled over. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and his hands shook as he pressed himself against the wall. The entire classroom fell silent, 27 pairs of eyes staring at their classmate who looked like a cornered animal. I'm sorry, Malik whispered, his voice barely audible. Malik, it's okay, Ms. Carter said gently, dismissing the other students to their activities. Jessica just bumped into your desk by accident. No one's upset with you. It took nearly 10 minutes for him to stop shaking. That afternoon, Ms. Carter made a decision that would change everything. She had planned to spend their art period working on seasonal decorations, but something told her this was the moment to try a different approach. Today, we're going to do something special, she announced to the class. I want you to draw your safe place. It can be anywhere, real or imaginary. A place where you feel completely protected and happy. The assignment sparked immediate excitement among most students. Chatter filled the room as children discussed treehouse hideouts, grandparents' kitchens, and cozy bedroom corners. Some students began sketching immediately, their faces bright with the joy of sharing their personal sanctuaries. Malik sat frozen at his desk. What's wrong, buddy? Ms. Carter asked, kneeling beside him. I don't understand the assignment. Just draw a place where you feel safe. Where do you go when you want to feel better? The confusion in his eyes was heartbreaking. It was as if she'd asked him to describe a color he'd never seen. For the next 30 minutes, Ms. Carter watched as her students created vibrant, warm depictions of their safe havens. There were drawings of family living rooms with crackling fireplaces, bedrooms filled with stuffed animals, and backyards with tire swings and laughing siblings. And then there was Malik's drawing. At first glance, it looked like the work of a much older, much more troubled child. The paper was filled with dark, heavy strokes that seemed to press anger and fear into every line. In the center sat a house, if it could be called that. The structure was falling apart. Windows were broken, some boarded up with rough planks that looked like scars across the building's face. The front door was secured with chains, drawn in such detail that Ms. Carter could almost hear them rattling in the wind. The roof sagged dangerously, and weeds grew wild around the foundation, as if nature itself was trying to reclaim the abandoned space. But it was the figure in one of the upstairs windows that made Ms. Carter's breath catch. A small, thin silhouette stood behind cracked glass, one hand pressed against the window as if trapped inside. The figure's posture conveyed a loneliness so profound it seemed to seep off the paper. Malik, she said carefully, can you tell me about your drawing? He looked up at her with those hollow eyes, and for a moment, she saw something she'd never noticed before. It wasn't just sadness or exhaustion. It was the weight of secrets too heavy for a 10-year-old to carry. It's just a house, he whispered. But Ms. Carter knew better. This wasn't just a house. This was a cry for help, expressed in the only way a child knew how when words felt too dangerous to use. As she collected the art projects that afternoon, she handled Malik's drawing like evidence of a crime she didn't yet understand. The other children's pictures would go home to proud parents and onto refrigerator doors. Malik's drawing would keep her awake that night, studying every detail and wondering what terrible secret lay hidden behind those dark, heavy lines. The drawing haunted Ms. Carter through the weekend. She found herself staring at it during her morning coffee, analyzing every stroke as if it were a map to understanding Malik's world. By Monday morning, she had made a decision that would either solve the mystery or make her question her own judgment forever. She was going to follow him home. The thought made her stomach churn with professional anxiety. Teachers weren't supposed to stalk their students, even with the best intentions. But every instinct she'd developed over 8 years of working with children was screaming that Malik was in danger, and traditional channels had failed her. She'd spent Friday afternoon making discreet inquiries. The school counselor had no recent notes on Malik. The office staff confirmed that his grandmother, listed as his guardian, hadn't responded to any communication attempts this year. Even the school nurse had no record of recent visits, despite Malik's obvious exhaustion and the fact that he sometimes looked genuinely unwell. Monday afternoon, as dismissal time approached, Ms. Carter's heart hammered against her ribs. She had positioned herself near the main office window, where she could observe the pickup area while appearing to organize paperwork. As expected, Malik emerged from the building alone. But instead of heading toward Maple Street, where his file indicated he lived, he turned in the opposite direction entirely. Ms. Carter waited exactly 2 minutes before following. Staying far enough behind to avoid detection, she watched as Malik's small figure moved through the neighborhood with purpose. This wasn't the wandering walk of a child heading home after school. This was the careful navigation of someone who knew exactly where he was going and wanted to get there unseen. He cut through the parking lot of an abandoned grocery store, slipped between 2 houses on Pine Street, and then disappeared into an alley that Ms. Carter had never noticed before. Her teaching heels were completely inappropriate for stealth, but she pressed on, driven by a mixture of concern and growing dread. The neighborhood was deteriorating the further she got from the school. Well-maintained lawns gave way to cracked sidewalks and boarded windows. When she reached the alley where Malik had vanished, Ms. Carter discovered it led to a back lot filled with condemned buildings. A chain-link fence surrounded the area, topped with barbed wire and decorated with "Keep Out" and "Danger" signs in multiple languages. But there was a gap in the fence, just wide enough for a small person to squeeze through. Ms. Carter's mouth went dry as she realized what she was looking at. The building that dominated the lot was a perfect match for Malik's drawing: broken windows, sagging roof, weeds growing wild around the foundation. Even the chains on the front door were exactly as he had drawn them. This wasn't his imagination. This was his reality. She crouched behind a dumpster, feeling ridiculous but unable to leave. Through a gap in the fence, she could see Malik slip between 2 sheets of plywood that had been arranged to look sealed but actually created a hidden entrance. For the next hour, Ms. Carter remained frozen in that alley, watching a building that should have been empty but clearly wasn't. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of movement through the broken windows, shadows that moved too purposefully to be tricks of light. As the sun began to set, she saw something that made her heart stop. A smaller figure appeared in one of the upstairs windows, a little girl, maybe 6 years old, pressing her face against the cracked glass just as Malik had drawn in his picture. The child's hair was braided with colorful beads, and even from a distance, Ms. Carter could see the family resemblance. Malik wasn't alone in there. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't just a child living in dangerous conditions, he was protecting someone. The exhaustion, the hoarding of food, the hypervigilance, the fear of loud noises, it all made terrible sense now. Ms. Carter's first instinct was to call the police immediately. Children living in a condemned building was clearly a matter for Child Protective Services. But something held her back, a nagging voice that whispered this situation was more complex than it appeared. If she called authorities now, what would happen? The children would be removed, certainly, but would they be kept together? Where would they go? What circumstances had led them to this desperate situation in the first place? And most importantly, why was Malik so terrified of adults that he would choose this over asking for help? As darkness fell, Ms. Carter finally forced herself to leave the alley. But the image of that little girl's face in the window stayed with her, along with the growing certainty that whatever had happened to bring these children to such desperation, rushing in with official interventions might do more harm than good. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with Malik's drawing spread before her, seeing it with completely new eyes. It wasn't just a cry for help, it was a confession. A brave little boy's attempt to tell someone his truth in the only way he felt safe. The question now was what she would do with that truth, and whether she was brave enough to earn the trust of a child who had learned that adults couldn't be counted on to protect the people he loved most. Tomorrow, she would have to face Malik knowing his secret, and somehow find a way to help without destroying the fragile world he was fighting so hard to hold together. Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ms. Carter found herself watching Malik with new eyes, seeing protective instincts where she'd once seen withdrawal, recognizing survival strategies disguised as behavioral problems. When he carefully wrapped his uneaten sandwich in a napkin and slipped it into his backpack, she knew it wasn't for him. By the time the final bell rang, Ms. Carter had made her decision. She couldn't let another night pass without offering help, but she also couldn't betray Malik's trust by involving authorities without his consent. This conversation would require delicacy she'd never needed before. "Malik, could you stay after class for a few minutes? I'd like to talk about your drawing." The color drained from his face so quickly that Ms. Carter immediately regretted her directness. His hands began to shake as he gripped his backpack straps. I need to go home. My grandmother will worry." "Malik." Her voice was gentle but firm. "I know." 2 words. That's all it took for his carefully constructed world to crumble. His legs gave out, and he sank into his chair as if the weight of his secret had been physically holding him up. For a long moment, the only sound in the empty classroom was his ragged breathing. "Please don't call them," he whispered. "Please don't call the people who take kids away." Ms. Carter pulled up a chair beside him, moving slowly as if approaching a wounded animal. "Tell me what happened. Help me understand." The story came out in fragments, interrupted by tears and long silences where Malik seemed to gather courage for the next revelation. His grandmother, Evelyn Williams, had been their guardian since Malik was 5 and his sister Amira was barely walking. Their mother had left when Amira was born, and their father had never been in the picture. Grandma Evie, as they called her, had been everything: provider, protector, storyteller, and the only stability they'd ever known. "She got sick in September," Malik said, his voice barely audible. "Real sick. She kept saying she'd be fine, that we shouldn't worry, but she couldn't get out of bed most days. I started doing the grocery shopping, making dinner, getting Amira ready for her daycare." Ms. Carter's heart broke imagining this small boy shouldering such enormous responsibility. "What happened 2 months ago, Malik?" She didn't wake up one morning." The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make them hurt less. "I tried to wake her up for a long time. But she was cold." The silence that followed was deafening. Ms. Carter had to press her hand to her mouth to keep from gasping aloud. "I didn't know what to do," Malik continued. "Amira kept asking why Grandma Evie wouldn't get up. I told her she was just really tired. Then I remembered what happened to Marcus. Marcus, he explained, had been a boy in their old neighborhood whose grandmother had died. Social services had come within hours, splitting Marcus from his little brother and placing them in separate foster homes across the city. The boys had been inconsolable, and the last Malik had heard, Marcus's brother had run away from his placement 3 times. "I couldn't let them separate us," Malik said fiercely. "Amira's all I have left, and I'm all she has. So I figured out how to handle everything myself." The logistics were both heartbreaking and ingenious. Malik had used his grandmother's phone to call the landlord, imitating her voice to say they were visiting relatives and would be back soon. He'd found the condemned building during one of his panic searches for somewhere safe to hide with Amira. The building had electricity from an illegal connection, and he'd learned to siphon water from a working pipe in the basement. "How do you keep Amira safe during the day?" "There's a lady 2 blocks over who watches kids for people who work. I told her our grandma pays monthly, and I give her whatever money I can find. Amira thinks we're just staying somewhere new while Grandma Evie gets better." Ms. Carter was struggling to process the courage and desperation that had driven this 10-year-old to create an entire survival system. "Malik, you can't keep living like this. It's not safe, and you're just a child. You shouldn't have to take care of everything alone." "But what if they split us up?" His voice cracked. "What if I never see Amira again? She's only 6, Ms. Carter. She still has nightmares and only stops crying when I sing her the songs Grandma Evie used to sing. If they take her away from me..." He couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Ms. Carter understood that in Malik's mind, staying together in danger was better than being separated in safety. "What if I told you there might be another way?" she said carefully. "What if we could find help that would keep you and Amira together?" For the first time since their conversation began, hope flickered in Malik's eyes. "Is that really possible?" "I don't know yet," Ms. Carter admitted. "But I promise you this, I won't do anything without talking to you first. And I won't let anyone separate you from your sister if there's any way to prevent it." As they sat in that empty classroom, Ms. Carter realized she was making a promise she had no idea how to keep. But looking at this brave, broken boy who had sacrificed his childhood to protect the person he loved most, she knew she would move heaven and earth to find a way. That evening, Ms. Carter sat in her car outside the condemned building with a trunk full of supplies and a heart full of uncertainty. She'd spent hours after Malik's confession researching family preservation services, emergency kinship care, and sibling placement protocols. What she'd learned both encouraged and terrified her. There were programs designed to keep siblings together, but the system was overwhelmed and imperfect. Too many children fell through cracks, and Malik's fears weren't unfounded. She'd read horror stories of siblings separated for months or even years while paperwork crawled through bureaucratic channels. But she'd also found something else. A local organization called Safe Harbor Family Services that specialized in crisis intervention with a focus on keeping families intact. Their website promised creative solutions for complex situations, and their director, Maria Santos, had answered her careful phone inquiry with both professional expertise and genuine compassion. The key, Maria had explained, is building a bridge between crisis and stability. Sometimes children need time to trust the system, and sometimes the system needs time to find the right solution. Now, as Ms. Carter approached the gap in the fence with 2 large bags of groceries and a camping lantern, she hoped she was building that bridge rather than endangering these children further. "Malik?" she called softly at the hidden entrance. "It's Ms. Carter. I brought some things for you and Amira." The silence stretched so long she wondered if they were hiding, but finally the plywood shifted and Malik's face appeared, cautious but not surprised. "You came," he said simply. "I told you I would help. Can I come in?" The inside of the building was worse than she'd imagined. Water damage had warped the floors, and plastic sheeting covered broken windows. But in one corner, Malik had created something that could almost be called a home. Sleeping bags were arranged on elevated pallets to avoid the damp floor. Candles provided warm light, and children's drawings decorated the walls, Amira's artwork, bright and hopeful despite their circumstances. Amira herself was a revelation. Where Malik carried the weight of their situation in his hollow eyes and careful movements, his sister radiated the resilience of childhood. She looked up from a coloring book as Ms. Carter entered, her face lighting up with curiosity rather than fear. "Are you Malik's teacher? He talks about you all the time." Over the next hour, as they shared the food Ms. Carter had brought, and she helped Amira with her coloring, she began to understand the full scope of what Malik had accomplished. He'd not only kept them alive, he'd preserved his sister's sense of security and joy. Amira clearly adored her big brother, and while she missed Grandma Evie, she seemed to view their current situation as an adventure rather than a crisis. "Malik reads me stories every night," Amira announced proudly. "And he knows all of Grandma's songs. Want to hear?" Watching Malik's face soften as he sang their grandmother's lullabies to his sister, Ms. Carter felt her resolve strengthen. This wasn't just about child welfare. This was about preserving a bond that had already weathered the worst kind of loss. Over the following days, Ms. Carter established a careful routine. She'd arrive after school with supplies, help the children with homework, and gradually introduce the idea of additional help. She spoke with Maria Santos daily, building a case for emergency kinship placement that would prioritize keeping the siblings together. The breakthrough came when she brought Mrs. Patterson, the school counselor, for a carefully planned visit. Instead of the official interrogation Malik had feared, Mrs. Patterson spent 2 hours playing board games with Amira and listening to Malik's story without judgment. "You know," Mrs. Patterson told him as they prepared to leave, "I've never met a 10-year-old who was braver or more responsible than you. But even the bravest people need help sometimes." The next morning brought the twist that would change everything. Maria Santos called Ms. Carter with news that seemed too good to be true. "We've found something unusual," Maria explained. "Evelyn Williams had a niece, Carmen Rodriguez, who's been searching for the children since November. She filed a missing persons report when she couldn't reach Evelyn, but the children weren't in the system yet, so nothing connected. Carmen's been approved for emergency kinship care, And she's specifically requesting both children. Ms. Carter's hands shook as she absorbed this information. Are you sure? How do we know she's legitimate? We've done extensive background checks. She's a nurse, single, with a stable home and income. More importantly, she has photos and stories that prove her relationship to the children. She remembers Malik's love of math and Amira's obsession with unicorns. She's been heartbroken thinking they were lost. That afternoon, Ms. Carter sat with Malik and Amira in their makeshift home, preparing to share news that would end their ordeal. But as she looked at their faces, Malik's guarded hope and Amira's innocent trust, she realized the true twist wasn't that help had finally arrived. The twist was that sometimes, when the world seems darkest, love finds a way to build bridges across impossible distances, and the very system you've learned to fear becomes the path to the family you never knew you still had. 3 months later, Ms. Carter stood on the front porch of a cheerful yellow house, holding a bottle of wine and wearing her brightest smile. Through the window, she could see Malik helping a woman with kind eyes set the dinner table while Amira danced around the kitchen with a wooden spoon microphone. The transition hadn't been seamless. Despite Carmen Rodriguez's genuine love for the children and her determination to provide them with stability, Malik had struggled with releasing the protective control he'd maintained for so long. The first week in Carmen's home, he'd hoarded food in his bedroom and stayed awake until dawn, listening for sounds of danger that never came. But Carmen had been patient in ways that spoke to her deep understanding of trauma. She'd let Malik check the locks every night until he felt secure. She'd kept extra snacks visible in the kitchen so he could see they would never go hungry again. Most importantly, she'd included him in decisions about Amira's care, recognizing his role as protector even as she gradually took on the adult responsibilities he'd shouldered for too long. "Ms. Carter!" Amira's voice rang out as the front door flew open. The little girl launched herself into her former teacher's arms, chattering excitedly about her new school, her new friends, and the unicorn backpack Carmen had bought her for starting first grade. "And guess what? Malik is on the honor roll again. And Carmen says we can get a puppy when we move to the bigger house this summer." The changes in both children were remarkable. Amira had always been resilient, but now her joy felt more grounded, less manic. She could talk about Grandma Evie, with sadness but without the desperate clinging that had characterized her first weeks with Carmen. Malik's transformation was even more profound. He still carried himself with unusual maturity for an 11-year-old, but the constant tension had left his shoulders. His eyes, once hollow and watchful, now held the curiosity and hope that belonged in a child's face. "Thank you for coming," he said, hugging Ms. Carter with the easy affection that had taken months to develop. "Carmen made your favorite, the lasagna recipe you gave her." Over dinner, Ms. Carter listened to stories of homework sessions that didn't happen at kitchen tables lit by candles, bedtime routines that included actual bedtimes, and weekend adventures that didn't involve searching for food or safe places to sleep. Carmen shared updates about therapy sessions, school conferences, and the small daily victories that marked their journey toward normalcy. "Malik's counselor says his protective instincts are actually a strength," Carmen explained as they cleared plates. "He just needs to learn when it's okay to be a kid again." After dinner, while Carmen and Amira worked on a puzzle, Malik approached Ms. Carter with something hidden behind his back. "I made this for you," he said shyly, producing a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a drawing, but this one bore no resemblance to the haunting image that had started everything. This picture showed a house, warm, welcoming, with light streaming through clean windows and a front door painted bright blue. In the yard, 3 figures played with a small dog while flowers bloomed in neat garden beds. But it was the addition in the background that made Ms. Carter's eyes fill with tears. There, clearly visible through one of the bright windows, was a classroom scene. A teacher stood at a whiteboard while children raised eager hands, and in the corner sat a reading nook with comfortable chairs and shelves full of books. "It's my safe place now," Malik explained. "All of it. This house, Carmen and Amira, schooled your classroom. Even the hard parts, because now I know that when bad things happen, there are people who will help." At the bottom of the drawing, In Malik's careful handwriting were the words, "Thank you for seeing my picture and understanding what I couldn't say." As Ms. Carter prepared to leave that evening, Carmen walked her to the car. "I need you to know," Carmen said quietly, "that what you did, the risk you took to help them on their terms first, that made all the difference. If you'd gone straight to authorities, Malik would have run. He needed to trust that someone understood his love for Amira before he could trust the system to protect it." Driving home through the quiet neighborhood, Ms. Carter thought about the lesson Malik had taught her about the power of really seeing her students. Not just their academic performance or behavior, but the whole complex reality of their lives. She thought about the other drawings hanging on her classroom walls, wondering what stories they might tell if she learned to look with the same careful attention she'd given to Malik's. Some children, she realized, spoke through art what they couldn't risk saying aloud. And sometimes, a teacher's most important job wasn't teaching reading or math or science. Sometimes, it was simply learning to listen with her eyes, and having the courage to act when a child trusted her enough to share their truth in whatever form they could manage. The next Monday, she would begin her art lesson with a simple assignment. Draw your safe place. But this time, she would really be listening.